Roberta Romero, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. Well, you and I've known each other for quite a long time. And, I know a bit about your history, but why don't we talk about it so that other folks know where Roberta Romero came from and how she got to Seattle, because your life actually started in New Mexico. So tell us about that.
So I was a reporter in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That was where I was born and raised. Thought I'd made it. I'm in my hometown. I'm Mary Tyler Moore, throwing my hat up. And, couldn't really get opportunities in Albuquerque. And one day I was told him, one day I'm going to get a job in a big city. And a friend of mine got a job at King, and he said, send a tape. And so I did. And they hired me. And and this was the news director at the time, he flew us all to Dallas because he wanted the junket. So I didn't even come to Seattle. I had no idea what it looked like. I had no idea what the station looked like. And they offered me the job, and I was crying because I didn't want to leave my home. It was really hard to leave my family. I think there's some deep roots, especially with people of color. I mean, that's a really big part of who I am and how I was raised. So leaving was very big for me. And ended up in Seattle. In fact, we come off I-90, my husband and I, and instead of going north to take the exit to downtown Seattle, we took south. And the first night that I spent was at SeaTac, looking out at Deja Vu and going, what did I do? Where am I? I thought they said there was water around here.
That's part of the landscape,
It is. Yes. So it was a good way to jump into the city of Seattle. But I will tell you, if you guys, I've been talking a lot about my past and getting here. And one of the comments I got when I got my job at King 5, which is a very big deal, people around the country know this station. And my white male coworker said, "Oh, you must be the quota hire."
Oh. Mm-hmm. Well, at least he was honest, right?
He was. And I wanted to point out to him, there are a lot more white men that were working as reporters. So the odds of you getting a job are much higher. So I must be exceptional because I had to beat out of him. Well, I didn't think of it at the time. I didn't think of it at the time. I'll tell you.
When Matt and I both worked at King. And when I came there in 1978, I heard exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. So you're not alone. And yeah, so.
And that extra burden of having to overcompensate and like really be on that, I've got to be extra good or, extra hard worker. Yes, I'll take all the bad assignments. Yes, I'll work overtime, never, because I felt that heavy responsibility that I had to prove myself because I didn't get there on my so-called work ethic or heart or talent or whatever. It was because I was, the lucky one.
Yeah, but don't you think that like for people of color in the business back then, it wasn't even a conscious thing that like I have to work hard. You just did.
True.
Right? That was the given. You just, that was the game you're entering.
Right.
Yes, you're right. This is with perspective. Excellent point, Matt. You're right. This is now as an adult looking back on all of the places that I got here. Certainly when I was in it, I did feel lucky, and
you do.
And I still feel very fortunate to have landed here. I really do. So yeah, that was in 1992, back when, we had 8 hours to do one story. Trying to explain that to journalists today. Yeah. I didn't have to write a web story. I didn't have to tweet about it or do Instagram about it. I didn't have to cut 5 different versions of it. I was able to get both sides of the story. I could get I could get different angles. I just look at that and think, I was so spoiled. What a luxury. Yeah. To actually craft a story instead of just get it on the air as fast as possible. So, yeah.
When you came to King, you were part of a group that was hired at that time. And it was kind of like this mod squad in a sense. That dates us about, television time, but and it was under a news director that I'm aware of, a guy named Bob Jordan, who was an interesting guy, but he hired you as a Latina. He hired Mona Locke, is well, Mona Lee then is an Asian, and Robert Mack, another Asian reporter, and Dan Lothian.
Yes.
And you know, I was not a Bob Jordan fan because the guy was, I always called him like the Saddam Hussein of news because he was brutal. He was kind of a brutal guy, but you know, he was effective in getting ratings and changing things around there. But he hired this quartet that, you know, and you guys, you know, you made your marks in this market. Now, Dan went on to do, I think, network news and things, but so he had an eye for talent, but he brought in some people that made their mark in this market, as you did. So
and people of color. Yeah. Right, so you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, you know, I can't really say that I would find, I don't consider him to be a real progressive person, but in that sense, for what he did, yeah, you know, he picked you, and that was a good thing.
Thank you. I would call him strategic for sure. He knew his business.
He did.
You know?
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
He was very smart. I will say that. Yeah.
You are Latina. Your parents are Mexican American.
Yes. Well, from New Mexico, you know, I kind of consider us, you know, a mutt, you know, because you can say that I have supposedly, and we have done some genetic tests. Our roots are Spain. Actually, our family were Jewish, and we fled the persecution there, and then immediately become Catholic. I'm like, people, you already made it here. Stick to your guns. I mean, my goodness.
Well, they didn't want to get away from the guilt. You know,
so, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just thought that was, you know, if you look at our land, I was born and raised in Albuquerque, but my family's from a very small town called Aragon. And there's actually an Aragon in Spain, but there are actually markers on our land that because I guess in the past, Bush people would mark their land with these certain stones in the corners, and we found them. Wow. So I think there's some truth to that. But, you know, I also supposedly I had a great grandfather Irishman who married a Hickory Apache woman. So, you know, a mutt for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
but definitely, Latino.
New Mexico definitely has a, you know, indigenous.
Yes. And Pueblo Indians. Yes. Right. Which is,
Yeah. But you didn't grow up speaking Spanish.
No. And this, again, Matt, is a story that I didn't figure out until I was older. And this also goes into my story of recovery from alcoholism, because my parents only spoke English to me. And I found out as an adult that when they were children in elementary school in that little town in New Mexico, the white teachers would hit them if they spoke Spanish. So it wasn't just the loss of the language, it was also their culture, their food, you know, that weird burritos that they would bring, or tacos, you know, all of that, you know, you just suppress it all to fit into this mold. So of course, when my father went to college and they went to Albuquerque, the big city, it was not cool to be multicultural in the 60s. It wasn't cool to celebrate. You locked and stepped into that system if you wanted to be successful. And you know, it served us. You know, my mom made sure we bought a house in a certain school district. So most of my my friends were white. You know, I wasn't in a school that was very multicultural. So I was never taught Spanish. But to go along with that story, though, I studied it in high school. I studied it in college. I did everything. I could not pick it up. I couldn't. And then I figured out when I went to treatment, there was domestic violence in my house. My father was an active alcoholic, and he would hit my mother. And when they fought in Spanish.
Ah, interesting.
And so as a child, I just shut that down. It actually, you know, so I whatever it is, my brain just says, turn it off. Yeah. And I worked that out with a therapist. So, you know, now that I know, now it's my duty to try and figure out how to get back that, you know.
So let's talk about alcoholism. I recently marked my 3-year of no alcohol. And I before that, I had gone a number of years where I was drinking. And then, but before that, it was like 4 years that I didn't drink. I stopped again on January 16th in 2019. I've battled depression, and so that was really the reasoning that I thought, okay, that's not going to help me if I'm on an antidepressant. And I've been through this stuff numerous times. So I decided to stop. And, and I have to say that, it is, there are days when I wouldn't mind a glass of wine or a glass of scotch or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've gotten to where I'm pretty used to not, it's fine. It's not there, controlling my life or whatever. I don't even know if I'm alcoholic or whatever, but I knew that it was an issue. It was becoming an issue for me. How about you? How did it start?
I really appreciate you sharing that story with me. There's so much stigma around alcoholism and mental health that people want to talk about it. And I also feel people of color in particular, the shame around that. Nobody knew growing up. Nobody knew that my father was alcoholic. We kept that secret locked down. I knew not to talk about it. But we'll flash forward to this. I'll go to a little bit of my story. So, I'm a reporter on air. I have a husband, home. At the time, I had a 3-year-old son, and I just gave birth to infant twin daughters.
Whoa.
No family here. So I had no support. Who are you going to ask? Hey, Enrique, you want to come over and change some diapers?
Yeah, in plural.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not just one. Yeah.
Yep. So really locked down, really isolated. And then of course, I had a glass of wine at the end of the day, and I will be honest with you, I was always a binge drinker. I think it was just part of growing up. I remember in the 80s, everybody just drank. I drank in high school. You drank at football games, you drank at dances, funerals, weddings, whatever. It's just so part of the culture. But it was always binge drinking for me. And I was able to stop. There was just not that big of a deal for me. And then after the twins were born, I'm sure there was some postpartum depression on it, but I don't want people to get confused like, oh, that's why, because alcoholism was my destiny. It's genetic. It was what I was using as a tool. And I started drinking red wine. And then I don't know, that feral part in my brain went, this looks weird. I'm drinking too much. And all of a sudden I was hiding it. I don't even remember thinking about it, a conscious thought about it. I just knew if my husband comes home, he's going to be, what's going on? So I kind of started going underground. And then, it just became, there's this tipping point where all of a sudden I was in it and I didn't know how I got there. So, with alcoholism for me, it's this obsession. So how can I drink it? How can I have to buy it? I have to get rid of the empties. I can't be too drunk. It was just this huge, all consuming on top of taking care of 3 children, a very stressful job, a marriage. So just this chaos. And I can tell you this now, that alcohol is the symptom, not the problem. The problem was my head, my mental state. But, I was using that to self-medicate. Mm-hmm. I didn't know any of that. I just knew I was really sad. I was also really angry, a lot of rage for me, a lot of victimhood. I love being a victim. It's always your fault. You know that, Matt, right?
Of course I do.
Yeah. Yes. Enrique, I was cursing you both.
Yeah. I tell Matt all the time that it's always his fault. So that's
yeah.
No, I get it.
Yeah. So there I was in it. And then we kind of did this dance, my husband and I, we call it the dance, where he'd come home. I call it the sniff hug. He would hug me and then sniff me. I call it the sniff hug. We just kind of did this, he tried to be nice about it. And then he tried to be angry about it. And then he tried to be, checked out about it. It was just exhausting. And then lucky for me, I had a very high bottom, I never drank and drive. I had a lot of rules around it, and I was very isolated and alone, but luckily I had very high bottom. My husband at the time, and this was a while ago, went online and found out an intervention letter. And so he wrote one to me and he read it to me. And for whatever reason, I heard it. And so that was in October. And, I tried different ways to get, I'd go and do tests. There's this checklist where you can see if you're an alcoholic. And I would check, there's 15 of them. I'll give you the link. And so I would check off 12. Well, I'm not one because I didn't check off all 15. It's all those lies, okay, lady. I was lucky enough to find a Residence 12, which is over in Kirkland. It's an all women's treatment center. I actually believe in gender specific treatment because I trauma around men. You know, I mean, like how honest can you be? And it's just so vulnerable and you have to really dig deep. So I went to my news director, delightful. And let me tell you, that's where my ego was really tied up. You know, and I would say that whether I try to share that with corporate people, whether it's TV news or corporation, you know, that presence and like, will I have a job when I get out? Will I be marked? Will they not give me good stories? You know, all of that stuff. Luckily, you know, I was actually shocked. He looked at me and said, don't you worry. Don't worry. Go get your help. Your job is here when you get back. You just go and take care of yourself. And I was stunned.
Wow.
You know, it was shock, right? I still think that.
What
news
year
director.
was that happening?
So on January 2nd of this year, I celebrated 18 years of sobriety.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
So that was a pretty progressive attitude by the news director at that time.
Really?
Yes, it was, because come on.
Yeah,
you know, we're all
I
about
can see
image.
that happening today easily, right?
Yes.
Just because they understand the whole mechanism. But back then, 18 years ago, that's pretty progressive.
Yeah.
To go, I mean, that's how come, you know, I had so much fear around it because I was expecting yeah, we'll get back, but TikTok, you'll be here for another month and you're going to be fired. But yeah, so he was really open about it. And I went to treatment, went for 30 days. And then I'm a rule follower and that served me well. And I did a 12-step program. In the year 2022, there are many ways to get sober. And quite honestly, with our young people, and they are facing a tsunami of mental health after COVID, and all we do, you know, between the cannabis and the alcohol and the drugs, the prescription pills, we just have to figure out ways that we have to meet them where they're at. And that might not necessarily be a 12-step meeting, but it worked for me. And I live and die by the 12 steps. It's helped me live a different life. And I'm super grateful for it. And I'm happy to explain about how it was, because it sounds everybody thinks it's a cult, you know, or scary. It's not.
Do you still go to meetings?
I do. Yeah. I actually, you know, it's that same tipping point, like, oh, I just dreaded going to meetings, like, oh, and you're so awkward and you have to speak up and, oh, and you're so embarrassed and then all of a sudden you start getting into it. You find this group of people that are just like you and who get you. Lived experience, that peer-to-peer model, somebody who's walked the walk that you've walked, like, okay, I feel safe with you. So yeah, I can share with you. And when you go, I'm super excited about Matt working for the mayor. Because I'm like, here's what we need. That peer-to-peer model is now what we're doing all over the place. At an LGBTQ nonprofit that I worked at for a while, just because there's a lot of trauma even around city offices and bureaucracy. So we've got to reach these people to get them to the help of housing or employment. But walking into that city hall or there's too much trauma and fear and anger that they can't do it. So if you have that trained peer specialist to help them navigate it, that's the way we're going to change minds.
I think, right, because, I mean, this is just off the subject a little bit, but the whole idea of how we treat mental health in the law enforcement sector is, you know, we spend too much money on the front end and not enough on the back end, because once they're in custody, you need some place to put them.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that's where we need to concentrate on. You know, one of the things, I listened to a podcast you did a while back that really fascinated me, because I think, you know, like I do Hoarders, so I understand the whole identifying kind of how people, I mean, the reason the show works because people can identify with certain things.
Yes.
But what you said, one thing you said was about rules and how when you're kind of suffering with addiction, how you make rules. And I think that was a key thing that I listened to. I go like, I know a lot of people like that. And it's not just rules about alcoholism, but it's rules about maybe chocolate addiction, shopping addiction, all those types of things.
So explain that. What do you mean by rules?
Well, since I was, you know, the neighborhood alcoholic in recovery, you know, I kind of became, you know, like the go-to gal, and I'm happy, you know, because one of the reasons why I'm so happy about that is because getting back to that 2004 or 2003 when I was trying to find help, it was so hard. I am telling you, I'm a reporter. I know how to dig for information, and it was crazy. And what is, you know, like today, if you go and do a search for treatment, you are going to get a million. And some of them are shady, and some of them are for profit, you know, and some of them are outrageously expensive. And what is high quality and what takes insurance? It is horrifying. It is really hard to navigate. I will help you navigate that. I can be there. Come to me if you need help. That's how I also do my service work around my 12 steps, is to be there for others who need help, especially women, but also for men. So they like to come to me and they're like, hey, Bert, I'm wondering if I have a problem. And I go, well, what are your rules around drinking? And they're almost very proudly, almost super proud. I don't, I switched from hard alcohol to wine. I don't drink till after 5. I don't drink on Mondays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, and I'm like, wow, you have a problem. And they're like, what? What? I go, no one makes rules around drinking. If I'm a normal person, a normie is what we call them, and they say to themselves, wow, I'm drinking too much, they stop. They don't think twice about it. Enrique, when you were talking about how I still wish I could, so do I. The romance of alcohol still calls to me. That obsession did not leave me. I mourn that. It still makes me sad. A Super Bowl that I don't get to drink beer at, or fire and red wine, or a hot day, a margarita, all of that stuff. The American media advertising has programmed me well. So the cravings around it, so you just, I just appreciate that you shared that, because that is part of the story. And then you just think it through. Do I really need that? You play the tape out. Because I know I can't just have one. I know that. It will never be just one. It will always be more than one.
Right. And I think that's what hit me, was that I realized, well, for one thing, the depression that I have had an issue with from back in, I was diagnosed with major depression in 1987.
Wow.
And imagine back then, at King, and going and going to someone and saying, well, I've got depression and I just need some time. I couldn't tell anybody that. And of course, maybe I could have, but there was to me such a huge stigma about it that I just didn't take it there. I did talk to a guy who was, like, at the time, the general counsel at King, because I knew that he had an issue with alcoholism and depression, and asked him how he managed to get through it. And he said, it just was a long journey, and it just takes time. And then one day things kind of lifted, and I kept wishing for that day to arrive. But, when I decided to stop drinking again, it was really because, I knew what my limits were, and I knew that I was craving it too much. And along with the depression, I just knew I had to stop, because it was only adding to the problem. And so, I just said, that's it. I'm not going to do it. And that's what I've stuck with. So, and it's a challenge, but but I'm older now too. Yeah. So I've got to think about that as well, because of just the life, the way it is. But there are days when it's a little bit of a challenge, but you just kind of suck it up.
Yeah. So, or find that other joy, or that other, there's so much more. There's so much. I can lose a lot, and getting back to the youth, when we see our kids that are using drugs and alcohol, they're the hardest to try and get into recovery, but they usually have very hard, scary bottoms, because it's prescription pills, which goes to heroin. But they have nothing to lose. They have and their brains are still divided, but they, they're not going to lose their house or their career or their children, they're like, so they're really tough nuts. And plus their brains are developing. It's really, really interesting out there.
Well, see, that's the other thing, when it first hit, I was married, I had little kids and all these things. And that was, I felt bad for my ex-wife, because you put a lot on them and my family. So, you have all this kind of sense of guilt and all this other stuff. But, I think part of it for me is just I kind of reached this level of, like, okay, I know what my limits are, and I just gotta stop. I gotta deal with it. But back to you and dealing with all of this. What about Frank Chaponi? I know him well, your husband.
You do. So my husband was a sports anchor at Como.
Yeah.
for about 15 years. And then we tried our own business, which failed, which is great because he's now at Microsoft. And you don't go sports anchor to Microsoft without a failed business in between.
Right, yeah. But a good man, a very good man.
Yeah, thank you. He is obsessed with pickleball. He's been to the national tournament twice in Palm Springs. I know what my retirement looks like. And I'm okay with that. It's a great community. I'm on the sidelines, so I'm good. Yeah. You know, I think, thank you for bringing that up. And, you know, you talked about your wife. The alcoholism addiction is a family disease. I am not the only one that's suffering. We are all going down with the ship. Yeah. And you know, and so I'll tell you this, when I first went into treatment, Frank's idea was, great, you go get fixed and then come back. And then at treatment, he finally realized, like, oh, I need some fixing too. Yes, you do, my codependent friend. Yes, you do. So, you know, there's got to be some education around that, you know, and there has to be, and they have to come aboard too. You know, thank goodness he was willing to do it. One of my most defining moments was in treatment, and we were having our one-on-one counseling because that's part of it. And I'll tell you, I was already planning my relapse. I was, you know, I'm alcoholic. It's all I know, you know, and I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay. And for whatever reason, I was honest in that. It was a counselor, me and Frank. And I said, well, you know, the recidivism rate for alcoholism is like 90%. Almost, you know, everybody relapses. And he looked at me and he said, sorry, it makes me very emotional. He said, I don't have another relapse in me. And, you know, I heard him and I realized, okay, he's not playing a game anymore. We're not doing that dance anymore. I know it's at risk here. Yeah. And, you know, that was a huge turning point for me to realize that, you know, this is it. So, but it's a family thing that I really think about. And, you know, it's a genetic disease. So I'm very open with my children. We talk about this, you know, they're now 20, the girls are 23 and my son's 26. No alcohol in the house. Ironically, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I use that right. We use the word ironically incorrectly all the time. Yeah. I will say this. I was like, oh, you know, they're old enough and they're responsible drinkers. Should we have it? My husband's like, nope, no alcohol in this house. That's our rule, which makes it a really safe space for a lot of people, interestingly enough. I also thought it wasn't going to have fun anymore. I'm not going to lie. Wow. I thought once I got sober, I was never, ever going to have fun again because I was having so much fun at the end, you know. I've never laughed so hard. My husband and I laugh all the time. We have a ball. I thought I wasn't going to be as funny, but, you know, now not only I think I'm funny, but I can remember it, you know, so that's awesome. You know? Yeah. You know, remember how funny I was, honey? I do. Yeah.
Did Frank stop drinking?
He stopped drinking before me. I call my husband abnormally normal. He is such a weirdo. Yeah. He was so upset by it. And, you know, he'll get triggered. Like, you know, if he sees something like, you know, he's very sensitive to it. Yeah. And, you know, now we're at the point where like, we'll go out and he'll, you know, he didn't drink. Like we go out with friends and they drink around me. It's okay. It's my issue. You know, I really love and respect my friends when they say, hey, do you mind if I drink? At first I was like, you don't have to ask me, but now I really respect it because I look at it as if I was diabetic, would they eat cake in front of me? I know they wouldn't. You know, so it's, you know, so I like that they do. That does mean a lot to me. That's just somebody who I know loves me. But someone will say, hey, you know, is it okay if I have beer? I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely. And I always try, like friends go out drinking or they go out to happy. I'm like, I should be the first person you invite. I'm the designated driver. I'm like, except now with Uber, I guess it doesn't matter. But, you know, I'm like, yeah. So, yeah, we navigated it well. It was bumps, you know. Oh, and I hardly ever shared this part of it too. Here's the big part. So as an active alcoholic, I handed all my power over to Frank. I'm like, you get to make all the decisions. You get to do this. And then I got sober And guess what? I wanted my power back. And Frank didn't really like that either. You know? Like, oh, you now have an active partner who has her own opinions, who, you know, isn't going to say you do what you like, or, okay, we'll do that. Like, no, I don't want it. You know, so we did marriage counseling around this. I actually call it communication counseling. Yeah. Because it's really about communication.
Right.
You know.
Right. So you worked at King until what year?
I always kind of blur that, like 2014.
And then you left to go to work in the nonprofit world for a while?
I actually went to my treatment center, Residence 12, and I worked for them. Yeah. And I was doing fundraising. Please don't ever make me do that again. Oh, yeah. Matt, you get me.
I do.
I don't know if it's a cultural thing or something. I mean, I can connect people and I'm super passionate about it, but asking people for money.
That's a tough thing. That's hard.
Really
hard. That's a very tough thing.
That's a very hard thing. Yeah.
You know,
well, I think especially for people of color who are poor and you ask people for money, you know what that dollar means. Right?
Absolutely.
But if you grow up rich and wealthy, it's nothing. Yeah, just write me a check for $100. Oh, of course, you know. But if you're a person of color and you know, like, man, $5 is a big ask.
Right.
It is. And I think that is such a great point, Matt. The other point I would say is, for me growing up, it was never about writing checks. We would come and make dinner for you.
Yes.
We'd mow your lawn. We'd watch your kids. We'd do your laundry. You know, it wasn't very global, but it was very intense with that community. That it was, and it actually would be kind of insulting to give money.
Yes.
Exactly. You know? Right. I mean, you know, so so interesting things to work around. Unfortunately, Residence 12 did close. I'm sorry to say. We were a nonprofit hanging by our fingernails. A lot of for-profit have moved in. You know, it was just one of those things. And so with that, I was able to go to Peer Seattle, which is now Peer Washington, and that's an LGBTQ and allies nonprofit on Capitol Hill. And I got to tell you, I'm like, oh, I'm finally with the cool kids. I've never felt so hip in my life. Oh, I love it. And I actually joined the board after I left because it was a hard decision. It was a very hard decision to leave Peer Washington. They're doing great. They do that peer-to-peer stuff. They're doing training with some police departments. Mason County Sheriff's asked them to teach them about peer-to-peer for themselves within their own unit, because of trauma for police officers as well. You know, I mean, we've got to fix the whole thing. It isn't it's not a you and them. It's an us.
Mm-hmm. Right. It is very much so. So during the time that you were, working for the nonprofits and that, I would imagine you get a real good sense, and through your own personal journey, for people of color, and particularly young people of color, I would think, getting help or turning aware to get help, particularly if you speak a different language.
I know.
I mean, what do you do? How do you find the help? Because that's a tremendous challenge. And I know in the Latino culture, even asking for help that's just really difficult.
Yeah. Well, even Asian cultures, they don't
every
even
culture, let's face it.
recognize, well, Asian cultures, they don't even recognize mental illness. There are like no words.
Oh,
really?
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Matt, I'm wondering, have you seen mental health or alcoholism or addiction in your community and your family roots?
Of course. But, generationally now, as you move through, people understand the whole mechanism, but they really, with immigrant families, it still is a struggle because, like I said, they have no words for it. It's just like, and if the words they do have are very derogatory. Oh, that person's just crazy.
Yeah.
Or they're difficult. I mean, but they use derogatory terms in the language. And so there's not a lot of sympathy for it because, life was so hard for where they came from that somehow treating mental illness is a luxury.
Right.
That totally is. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's like my parents saying when we were growing up, well, you can't have bad teeth because we can't afford it.
Yeah.
No, really. No, seriously. And don't have allergies. No allergies,
And you do have lovely teeth. You're good genes, my friend.
Yeah.
It's the best money could buy.
No. I mean, I literally was like, boy, I better not get anything because, I know we can't afford it. But,
I think when this talk about, alcoholism and stuff, and people seem to really accept the disease and understand it, but sometimes I think about, do they really? Because the tendency is for people around alcoholism, around mental illness is like, well, they should just stop doing that.
Oh, God.
And they just don't understand that, like, if the wires are crossed, if there's something not right, that's the way it is. And no amount of will can change that. You can't fix it, but you can deal with it. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I just hear this so often. It's like, well, they try to fix people and they say, like, well, they can stop doing that. And that's not reality.
And it's also the worst thing you want to say to somebody who's having an issue. I can tell you, as someone who's had battled depression, the worst thing you can say to somebody that's a depressive is just, hey, get over it.
Yeah, snap out of it.
And it's, hey, I want to, it's just I don't really know how to get there.
How about this one? What do you have to be sad about?
Yeah, right. Yeah. You sad? I'll make you sad. Yeah,
really. Exactly.
Yeah.
You want to cry? We'll give you something to cry about.
Right. Yeah.
I guess we've all heard those ones. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Getting back to that, the immigrant young people, we're in this really weird. I will say, like, I feel like our children are they're really savvy. They're really savvy with the internet, with, phone, and they're getting their information though, like from, social media, which is talk about mental health issues. But, I think, I know that I love Seattle because I feel like we are doing great work out there. We've got these amazing nonprofits that are targeted specifically for, Ethiopian communities, because we're now recognizing that when you say Black person, there are many different types of, when you say Latino, when you say Asian, guess what?
Right.
There's Korean and Chinese, hello. So we're finally at least getting some direction to that. So very targeted to make sure that it's to that, because, and then like this Black community might want their information handwritten or person to person. Whereas this one wants a phone call, so we're learning that. I'm working with this organization called Healthier Here, and they're doing this deep dive in how to approach our BIPOC communities in a culturally appropriate way. And they're doing real life research on it with anecdotal stories. So it's not just numbers, like, it's actually this group and why they need it this way. It's fascinating. Yeah. So we have this stuff. We have this out there. I don't think people know how to access it or how to support them. People want to help. So Matt, let's go. Now I can tell them, write a check. I am good about that. Fund them. But, and it's weird with volunteering. Like some of it is like, let's go paint that house. We were just talking about the food bank where like you go for a day and sort the food. What about the next day? Or what about those people who stood 3 hours in line there? What about the next step where she had her children with her because she didn't have anybody to babysit her, to watch her kids so she could spend the 3 hours and get on the bike. Those deeper. Can we look a little deeper? It's not just about writing that check or donating to the food bank. Let's look at those issues, what we can do to help with that. So we do have a lot of great nonprofits. We do have people that are working to it, but they're all on shoestring budgets. Their funding is a lot through grants, and a lot of the grants have bizarrely difficult, strict. Like you can only donate to redheaded people. There's these rules around it that tie your hands. We don't want you spending it on keeping the lights on. Well, if I can't keep the lights on, then I can't help the person. Mm-hmm. Let me pay the electric bill, but we only want it to go just to the client. Well, I can't help the client if I can't. And also, can we please pay these people who are helping them livable wages?
Yes.
So all of our frontline workers that are on these nonprofits, they're also hanging by a thread. I'm very excited, Matt, for your new job. If you
I'm hearing a lot lately.
Yeah. Boy, everybody wants a piece of Matt now.
Yeah. But it's good to hear it. Because it just means people care. right?
Yeah. Yeah. And connecting the dots, it's so siloed. And I will tell you what I always found when I was with alcoholism, especially, I sing to the choir a lot.
Yeah.
I talk to people who already get it. I need to talk to the people who are saying, just don't be sad, Enrique.
Yes.
Just stop drinking, Bert. I need to talk to those people in a way that they can hear me. And that's another reason why I'm super out, upfront and out about my recovery, because I'm a mom, I'm an employee, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, and I'm an alcoholic. This is what we look like. And I'm a mom, I'm a worker. Yeah. So just trying to bridge that gap so we can get to that level.
So the humanity and the commonality.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now you're back at King again, and you are the executive producer of Facing Race. So tell us about that journey back.
Yes, thank you. My head was still spinning. I can't believe it. There's nothing that could have pulled me back into a newsroom, honestly, to do general assignments reporting. I loved it. I consider journalism a public service, but time for the young folk. And this opportunity, the reason why it kind of came about is because during COVID, the news director at the time did a call out to past employees and said, "Hey, we think this COVID thing is going to be a little bigger than most people think." And we're trying to get a bench and, get some people who have some experience who can step up. And I said, absolutely. So I actually did the assignment desk, Enrique, which means that I listened to police scanners. And it was on the weekends. Also, it was on Saturdays and Sundays. So that was when CHOP was happening, when the riots were happening, and they were shutting down I-5. And I started my day like this.
Oh,
I ended my day like this. It's unbelievable listening to police scanners and trying to catch all the news. And so that ended. And I went back, and then the assistant news director in October said, "Hey, we're kind of in a crunch. Can you help?" I'm like, "Yes, sure." And I was sitting there. And at the time, the executive producer of Facing Race, this is a lot of her vision. She's a hero. She's one of my heroes. I'm not going to lie. Her name's Kristen Ayers. And she drove this, and she made this unbelievable 13 episode, 1 hour episodes using special equipment. They wanted it to look like a documentary, like a Netflix, like a stream, like different level, not just local news. 1 hour specials. They've already won a ton of awards, the Peabody, Emmys, and really focused. And her idea was, we all know there's racism. We get it, but why? What? And let's have those really difficult, uncomfortable conversations with, for example, a white father who has a biracial daughter, and dig deep. And so they're beautiful. And so she ended up deciding to leave, and I'm sitting there, and they said, "Hey, Bert, would you like to apply?" And I said, "Why, yes, I think I would like to apply." And kind of before I knew it, I'm in the newsroom, executive producer, which a title I never expected to get, of Facing Race, creating these stories that I never in my life thought, first of all, that I would ever get to do. Second of all, that I thought would never get on the air.
Right.
And, it's evolved a bit. They're not doing those 13 1-hour specials anymore. And that's fine. That was a base. And that was after the George Floyd murder. And that's what sparked it. Now we're doing stories, we're still doing those deep dive stories. One of the stories we're doing right now is the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. And that's people who present themselves as indigenous to sell their art, and they're not. Mm-hmm. And what is it? How is it? How do I recognize it? And there was a big bust recently. They arrested 2 men in December. So that kind of sparked it. So we're doing those types of stories. We're also doing stories like, I'm really excited, Matt, to share this with you. And I found this story because we know very little about her, and I'm fascinated by her. Joanne Harrell.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what do you know about her?
I know that she's big time, and she's, been the part of the head of the Red Cross. She's at Microsoft. She's a regent at the UW.
I'm telling you, Bruce, you'll get him vote for her.
Well, he relies on her counsel a lot.
Yeah.
And that's how I found this story. I was reading the Seattle Times article, and he said, she's going to be on my transition team, and we are so lucky that we don't have to pay her. I'm like, what does he mean by that? And so I did a deep dive, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So my respect for Bruce as well, that he's smart enough to align himself with a woman like her. I'm very happy. Yeah. And so I got her and Joyce Taylor, and they're going to do this but no other stations thought about that. Nobody else is going to do it. It's going to be a 5-minute, story. It's not going to be a little sound where we just get sound bites of her. And
Yeah.
I'm super excited.
No, she's
about
fascinating.
That.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. She's like one of those people like, will you be my new best friend? Like Oprah. Like, will you be my new best friend?
Yeah, she was
Oh,
one who
not?
recruited me to start teaching at the UW. So
I told you she was brilliant, Matt.
I don't know what his students think about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so we're doing a lot of different stories, some deep dives, some features. What I'm doing right now, just for your information, I'm doing a bench. When so let's say we're doing a story on real estate. So we go to the same white realtor that we've used since 1992, the same face over and over again. Guess what? I know some incredibly smart BIPOC realtors. I want them to be on the bench. So it's not just about doing stories around and of and why. It's also that when you look at our stories and you're watching them, they're a reflection of our community. There are the doctors and the lawyers and the scientists, people of color, so that when our children are watching it, they're seeing that as well in our community. So I'm kind of got a couple of things that I'm working on, and yeah.
One topic that I was just, someone hit me in the face with it is this whole idea of critical race theory. Yeah. Somehow people are convinced that it's being taught in Seattle public schools, which it is not. But I think tackling what is it? I mean,
yeah, in an understanding way,
because it's like defund the police. It's this catchphrase that can mean almost anything, and usually it means something bad or stupid.
Well, let's face it. It has the people that are making it an issue basically have skewed what it is.
Yes, and they've taken over the narrative.
There you have. They're controlling the narrative on it, and they have made it a negative, saying that it's making white people feel bad. Well, come on, folks. It's understanding what our country is really all about and what the history of our country is, and there's a really great documentary that is out in theaters right now, of which we talked to a guy named Jeffrey Robinson about chronicling race in America.
Oh, unbelievable.
I would encourage people out there to, in fact, we got to have him back on. And Bert, I encourage you to get back on. And actually, I encourage you to maybe talk to Jeff, because that's a great story.
I'm going to.
It's a great story. I'm serious. I'm very serious about that. I want to thank you for taking the time to be so open and honest about everything that you've endured, and also to see that you're still back there. Tell Frank to be quiet. Out there, just doing the job, and particularly in the position you are now with facing race and doing that. I just thanks a lot, and we appreciate the fact that you have been just so open and honest about what you've endured. And
this next act is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
With your series. So
yeah.
It's great.
All right.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Enrique, you hold a special place in my heart. You're one of the first people that I met when I was at King. And I remember Evening Magazine. I still call it Evening Magazine. That's how old I am.
Yeah.
And Matt, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm super excited for what you're doing. I love this podcast. We were talking about media and how people are getting it. And I am podcast crazy. I love them. I'm like, I think this is the future. I love them so much. And I'm so happy to have you guys in my rotation. I was Deborah Juarez. I'm like, ooh, that's my next one lined up.
There you go.
Keep up the good work and keep me so I can get my story ideas from you.
There you go. Hey, we'll be happy to feed you. You can tell us all that sucks, but no, we'll be happy to share it.
Yeah, we're in the media long enough.
I'm here for you anytime you guys need me. I really enjoyed this, and if you need me for anything, whether it's this or something outside of the field, just let me know. I'm here for you.
All right, Roberta Romero. Thank you.
Thanks.